This is a recording for Marine Biology Module 6, and this module is the first part of the marine vertebrates. So previously we had talked about the fact that there is phylum Chordata, and we had said that there there is a subphylum here, which were the invertebrates. So we talked last week about some of the organisms that make up the invertebrates that are phylum Chordata. But this module, now we're going to talk about subphylum vertebrates. Okay, so those marine vertebrates that have a backbone. Okay, so they're phylum Chordata, subphylum vertebrates. And let's just quickly review about the vertebrates or phylum Chordata. We said that they have a notochord. And we looked at some examples. One example we looked at last week was that's an invertebrate, was the lancet. But the thing that distinguishes the vertebrates is that the notochord gets replaced by a backbone. And thus they are therefore in the subphylum of the vertebrates. So the vertebrates have a vertebral column, which is just the vertebrae stacked on top of each other, and then the spinal cord runs up through the middle. So the vertebrates are stacked, or if it's a different type, if it's an animal that's not upright, and then the spinal cord runs through the center of that vertebral column. Another, in terms of the skeleton of the vertebrates, most of the organisms that we looked at last week had an exoskeleton, but in this subphylum, the organisms all have an endoskeleton. Okay, so that their skeleton grows with the animal. It's internal. The muscles are on top of the skeleton. And the skeleton grows with the organism. So they don't need to shed like in an exoskeleton, because the skeleton grows with the animal. Okay, so that's the difference between exoskeleton and an endoskeleton. So in this subphylum vertebrates, part of phylum Chordata, we're going to generally talk about three types of organisms, and all of them are fish. So, they're called the fishes. And the first two that we will talk about are made of cartilage. So they don't have bone, they don't have hard bone, they have cartilage, and one of these, the first one, is jawless, so that's what sets it apart from the others. Then we'll talk about fish that are made of cartilage, that have cartilage as their skeleton, and then lastly we will talk about the bony fish. Okay, so that's where we're going to go. We'll work our way through these different categories of the fishes. I'm going to put up here the class names, but I'm not going to test you on the class names. I want you to know general characteristics. So the first class that we'll talk about is class Agnatha. And the skeletons are cartilage. And these fish do not have they don't have a jaw like the other fish that we will look at. So if they don't have a jaw, so there's no jaw, so they actually eat by suction. So they have their mouth is muscular, so it's a muscular mouth with teeth. And there are several different types of those. Let me get a picture up here so we can look at some of them. So here's one. This is a hagfish, which is an example of a jawless fish. And the interesting thing about this hagfish is that they actually bore into their prey, and then once they've bored into it, then they can consume it. So what I want you to remember about the hagfish is that they bore into their prey. So you can see these structures here that are used for that boring mechanism. They also can secrete a slime, and that slime helps to deter predators. So kind of a very interesting fish is the hagfish. They typically live in colder water, colder salt water. But so hagfish, they eat by boring into their prey, and they are one example of a jawless fish. Okay. Then another example of a jawless fish is the lamprey. Okay, so this is jawless fish again. And these are pretty common in zoos and aquariums, so you may have seen them. But you can, this is their mouth. And so you can see the suction devices and then these teeth that they use to bite into their prey. So a lamprey is another type of jawless fish. They tend, unlike the hagfish tends to be in colder water. Lampreys tend to be in warmer water. Let me tell you a few other things about the lampreys that are interesting. So here's a new word for you. Lampreys are anadromous. And And what that means is that they hatch in fresh water. Then they go and they live in salt water as adults. And then they will return to fresh water to reproduce. So the term for that is anadromous. So they return to fresh water to reproduce. And we're going to see later, we'll see that salmon do the same thing. So they also are anadromous, but the salmon are bony fish. They're not in this category of fish that are made of cartilage. The other thing about the lampreys that you should know about is that they are frequently parasites to bony fish. So they will they'll attach to the body of a bony fish with their teeth, and then they actually use their teeth to scrape through the skin of a bony fish, and then they will they use their tongue. Their tongue is they have a very rough tongue, and they will use their tongue to attach to the bony fish, and they'll suck the blood. So here, this picture here, you can see the lamprey here that are attached to this bony fish, and they will suck the blood from the bony fish. And interestingly, they have an enzyme that keeps the blood from clotting. So as they're sucking that blood, they will be secreting this enzyme so that the blood doesn't clot, and they're able to take it into their body. So that's the lamprey. Often will be a parasite to bony fish. Okay, so that is the type of fish. So that's the first category that we talked about. Their skeletons are made of cartilage, and they do not have a jaw, so they eat more with a sucking motion. Okay, next we will talk about the class that is called Chondrichthyus. Chondrichthyes, and the thing that's going to categorize this class is that they have an endoskeleton, but that endoskeleton is made of cartilage, not bone. But unlike the other ones that we just saw, they do have a jaw. Okay, so that's what sets them apart from the lampreys. So because their skeleton is made of cartilage, they're very flexible. Okay, and the fishes that would be in this category are sharks, rays, and skates. Okay, so we'll spend most of our time talking about sharks, but we will mention a few of the others. These organisms have very rough skin, and their skin have these tiny scales And those tiny scales are made of the same material as teeth. And so that gives it its rough characteristic. So same material as teeth. And those scales then are called, you can either call they're either called placoid scales, or maybe this one is a little bit easier, or they can just be called denticles. So this term denta means teeth. So the scales on sharks, rays, and skates can either be called placoid scales or they can be called denticles. Let's go ahead and look at a picture of a shark. Here's one. So, and I'll point out a few things here about the shark. So you can see that they have the different fins. The dorsal fin is the one that sharks are most famous for, the one that in movies you see sticking up above the water. But you can see that they have other fins. These fins on the back are used more for stabilizing the pelvic fin and the anal fin, the caudal fin, and the pectoral fins are used more for side-to-side stabilization and used for steering. Okay, one thing that I will mention is this nares. So let's go back and talk a little bit about that. So nares, what a nares is the opening to the nose, or the opening in the nose. So humans have nares. And with regard to a shark, water goes into this opening. And then once that water gets in there, there are sacs that are called olfactory sacs. So olfactory, anytime you see the word olfactory, you're dealing with smell. And then from the olfactory sacs, there are receptors that sense the smell, and then that information gets sent to the brain. Okay, so the big idea here is that olfaction is smell, and in the case of a shark, the water flows in, and then the olfactory sac picks up, the receptors in the olfactory sac pick up that scent from whatever is in the water. How do sharks eat? Well, or actually, I meant how do they breathe? In terms of respiration, if you've ever been to a aquarium where they have sharks, you notice that the sharks usually are swimming. So they swim with their mouth open. And so then as they are swimming, that the water goes into their mouth, and then it passes over their gills. Now they are able to pump water over their gills, but it's just not as efficient as just swimming. So as they swim with their mouths open, that water just goes into the mouth, and then it passes over the gills so that they can then, their bodies can then pick up the oxygen from the water and get rid of the carbon dioxide. So let's go back to that picture. So here's the gill slits here. So right here's their gill slits. So as they swim and as that water goes into the mouth, and it passes over these gill slits where oxygen and carbon dioxide get exchanged. I think that's all we'll say about from that particular picture. We'll say a few more general things in a little bit. Let's look at this. So sharks have there's different sharks have different types of teeth, and that primarily depends on their prey. So so they will have a type of teeth that is suited to their prey. And you probably know that sharks have rows of teeth, one behind the other, so that if a tooth is lost, then a tooth from the row behind it will move up and take its place. And they lose their teeth pretty frequently. So they have a lot of rows of teeth to replace those that are lost. My family lived in Florida one year, 2008, 2009. My husband was on sabbatical and we moved to Florida for the year. And the house that we were living in down there, the driveway was paved, I guess you could say, with ground up shells from the beach. And so my kids we found a lot of shark teeth. When we get together to do some of our labs, and one of the labs we will be doing is dissecting a shark. When we get together to do that, I will see if I can find some of those shark teeth that we found. But my kids had good collections of shark teeth that we just found in our driveway. Sharks come in, as you probably know, they can be very small. So the smallest shark is only about 6 inches long, but the largest sharks can be up to 60 feet long. Some sharks, so they have these teeth because most sharks are carnivores, but some are not carnivores, so some of them will filter plankton. So they're either carnivores, most of them are carnivores, but some of them will filter plankton. And take that, take plankton, remember, is from kingdom Protista. So the ones that filter plankton would have really, really tiny teeth, because they're not relying on their teeth for tearing into their prey. So most are carnivores, but not all are carnivores. Okay, let me say a few things about rays and skates. So if you've seen a ray or a skate, you know that they have a flattened body with a tail. So they're made of cartilage. We're still talking about fish that are made of cartilage. The skeleton is cartilage, and when you look at a ray and you see those the wing-like structures, those are actually they're pectoral fins. So we saw the pectoral fins on the shark. Well, in a ray and a skate, the wing-type things are their pectoral fins. The tail of a ray and a skate really act as a defense mechanism. So they use it to ward off predators. And that tail, especially on a ray, has a barb on the end. And that barb is similar to an arrow that's in the reverse direction. So once it goes in, it doesn't easily come out. And then they also, with those barbs, they can inject venom into their prey. They live on the bottom because they eat things like clams and shrimp and crabs. One thing that's interesting about them is they do not have teeth. Instead of teeth, what they have are plates. So no teeth, but they have plates. So what they do is they'll use suction. So they'll suction their prey into the mouth, suction prey in, and then they crush it. Then they crush it with these plates. So that's an interesting thing about, so that they just crush the shells of the clams or crabs or shrimp that they are eating. You probably know, I've heard about Steve Irwin, who was with Animal Planet, was filming and he got stuck directly in the heart by a stingray barb and died from that. So those barbs can be pretty dangerous. How is a skate different from a ray? The main difference is that a ray's tail is more harder, so whereas a skate, the tail is more fleshy. Other than that, they look pretty similar, but the tail is just more fleshy on a skate. Another difference is the skates lay eggs, and rays actually give birth to live young. And we're going to talk about differences here with regard to that in just a moment, or toward the end of the time. Okay, so the tail and the way that they give birth. Okay, I think that's all we'll say. You've probably seen other types of rays. Your book mentions electric rays. The electric rays actually have a muscle near their head that they can produce some electric shock. And that's a muscle near their head. So that's a way that they can stun their prey, and then therefore can capture their prey. Maybe you've seen manta rays or eagle rays. In those, the pectoral fins are more like wings. So those types of rays don't live so much on the bottom. They're more active. They're not so much bottom feeders. Okay. So I think that, so let's stop there. That's with let's stop there in terms of the fish that have cartilage. So we did those that have cartilage that do not have a jaw. And then we did the ones that have cartilage as a skeleton, but they do have a jaw. Okay, then the last category are the bony fish. And for the bony fish, the class that they are in is called Osteichthyes. Okay, so this word right here, ichthus, it comes from the Greek word ichthus. This means fish, and this means bone. Okay, so now we're looking at fish that aren't made, their skeleton is made of bone. Okay, so that's why we call them the bony fish. And for those of you who have taken biology and done labs with that, you know that they are covered in scales. And those scales are primarily for protection. They don't provide great protection from predators, but they do provide some protection. Another structure on this type of fish is called the operculum, and this is it's a bony plate that covers the gills. We'll look at a picture here in just a moment. Again, some of you may remember dissecting a perch, and we saw the operculum when we did that dissection. The operculum also, when the bony fish opens its mouth, water flows into the mouth, and then when they close their mouth, then the operculum opens, and then that allows the water to exit, and as it exits, it goes over the gills. So that's another structure that we see in the bony fish. And then another one that, again, you might remember from biology is the swim bladder. So the swim bladder is near the stomach, and they can fill this with air, and then because of that, they can control their buoyancy. So they can go up and down in the water by filling the air bladder or releasing air from the air bladder or swim bladder. So let's see. So here is a picture of a bony fish. So as I said previously, so water comes into the mouth, and then when they close the mouth, so the mouth is open, water comes in, then when they close the mouth, the operculum, which is right here, opens, and underneath that operculum are the gills. So once that operculum opens, then the water can flow over those gills, and then out the other side, and they can extract the oxygen from the water as it flows over the gills. So some of the same fins that we saw on the fish that are made of cartilage. This picture we don't see. Let's see, I think maybe the next picture then has a, I thought I had a picture of a swim bladder. Yeah, so I guess we don't see a picture. I don't have a picture with the swim bladder, but the swim bladder it's located near the stomach, and the fish is able to fill that swim bladder with air, or they can release air to go up or down in the water as they need to. The bony fish they come in different shapes. So you can see here 7 different shapes. And so like something that is tapered, this type of fish would be able to move through the water really easily. Off these ray type, so this is not a ray, but it's a bony fish, but it's shaped like a ray. So these would be more like bottom feeders. They would dwell on the bottom of the ocean. These disc-shaped or box-shaped fish, these types of fish often live near reefs. So you can see they don't have a real streamlined body, so they move very slowly, and so that shape is advantageous for them living near a reef. If you have something that's eel-shaped, you can imagine that type of fish lives in places where there's a lot of narrow places, so they'll live amongst rocks or amongst coral. Same thing with the elongated, so they can squeeze into smaller places. Flounders are they're kind of flat side to side, so they don't have a lot of meat to them side to side. And the interesting thing about this, so this would be an example of this would be a flounder. They actually, when they're young, when they're young, one eye will actually move to the other side of the body, and then they kind of lie on their side with both eyes on the top side, and that gives them better vision for predators. So that's kind of a fascinating thing that the flounder will do. So they're very thin side to side, but they actually end up kind of lying on their sides and looking up. I do want to talk about 3 terms that maybe sometimes we use interchangeably when they're actually different from each other. And those terms are camouflage, disguise, and advertisement. So camouflage means that they blend in with their environment. So if they are, or blend in with their surroundings. So depending on their surroundings, if it's a fish that lives in a really colorful surrounding, their colors would be very bright. But if their surroundings are more muted, then their colors would be more muted. So they blend in with their surroundings. Here they have a special type of cell that is called a chromatophore. Chromatophore. And these are pigment cells. So they produce color, and what happens with these cells is they either expand or they contract to change color. So they get bigger or they contract for the fish to be able to change color. Okay, so that is camouflage. Is just blending in with their surroundings. So, that helps them with regard to hunting for prey, but also hiding from predators. So if they can blend in and kind of, and kind of sneak up on the prey, or they can blend in and escape from predators. Then another thing is disguise. And in disguise, what they usually do is they hide various body parts, or they'll have like a fake marking that looks like a body part. And disguise is designed to confuse their predators. Another thing they may also do is they might mimic the coloring of other fish. So they might mimic the color of a fish that is not prey for a particular type of fish, so then they wouldn't be preyed upon by that type of fish. So disguise, let's look at a picture so we can see these first two. Okay, so here the first one, this one over here is camouflage. And you can see how the fish, the bright red colors will blend in with the surroundings. But then this fish has a disguise because you can see this band of color that is around the fish's eye. But then they have a spot here that is made to look like an eye. So their actual eye is disguised by this band of color, and then they actually have a fake eye. So all of that is just designed to confuse their predators. Okay, then lastly, the last one then is advertisement. And in advertisement, they actually are trying to attract people, or trying to attract other fish to them. And that's primarily for mating. So they will attract mates. But another thing they will also use it for is to attract other fish that they want to clean. So some fish get their food by cleaning things off of other fish. That's called mutualism. So they will advertise themselves through color to attract fish that they want to clean or that they want to mate with. So the picture here is of a lionfish, and the colors are designed to mate, to try to attract a mate. Okay, we're going to spend the rest of our time now just talking about some of the characteristics, some general characteristics of all of these fish in terms of their anatomy and physiology. And then we'll finish up with talking about some of their behaviors. So let's start with talking about feeding. Most of the fish are carnivores. Now remember, I did say that there are some that eat plankton, but most are carnivores. So like sharks and rays, and most of the bony fish are carnivores. However, there are fish that are called gill rakers. And what the gill rakers do, we would call these filter feeding, because they, as the water flows over their gills, they extract plankton from the water. Okay, so most are carnivores. Some are the gill rakers extract plankton, and then there are also fish that are called grazers, and they actually eat plants. They would eat the sea grasses and things like that. Like the sharks are carnivores. Most of the bony fish are carnivores. But then there are these others. Oh, here's one interesting fish that your book talks about is called a parrotfish. Maybe you won't want to go to a sandy beach after hearing this, but the parrotfishes eat coral. And after they have eaten that coral, they use the food. So they eat the food off the coral. But then the rest of the coral, coral is made of calcium carbonate. So they eat the food off the coral, but then the calcium carbonate just gets digested and eliminated from their body. So it kind of gets ground up, and it gets eliminated from the body. So we said about the digestive system, it goes from the mouth all the way to the anus. So the calcium carbonate, they eat the food off of the coral, but then this calcium carbonate gets digested and gets eliminated from the anus, and most of the sand that you see on the ocean, or much of the sand, comes from these parrotfish that have digested that calcium carbonate and then eliminated it from their bodies. So I did just talk a little bit about the digestive system. So the members of this of the fishes, they do have like a complete digestive system, mouth to anus. If you look at a shark intestine, I wish we had a picture of this, but I don't. If you look at a shark intestine, they actually have a valve that's kind of spiral shaped. So they have a spiral valve in their intestine, and the benefit of that is that it increases surface area, so that they can they have a larger area to absorb the food that they have consumed. So larger surface area for food absorption. Not unlike humans, who are, our intestines our small intestines are very long and kind of coiled up inside us. And the reason they are like that is to provide a larger surface area so that things can be absorbed. Okay, so that's an interesting thing about the shark, is that spiral valve that they have. Circulatory system. So remember last week we talked about a open and closed circulatory system. Well, the fishes have a closed circulatory system. So blood circulates in blood vessels. So they have fish have a two-chambered heart. We have a four-chambered heart, but fish have a two-chambered heart. Their heart is just divided into an upper chamber and a lower chamber. The upper chamber is called the atria, and the lower chamber is called the ventricle. But then when the blood leaves the heart, it leaves via blood vessels, and is brought back to the heart by blood vessels. Okay, so it's not an open circulatory system where the blood is just dumped. It's carried away in arteries and brought back in veins. Related then to the circulatory system, so when the blood circulates, then the water comes in and flows over the gills, and those gills pick up oxygen. That oxygen then gets transported to in the blood. So one of the things, if you look at the gills of a fish, you will notice that they are very, I mean, when you dissect the fish, obviously you're not going to see this because the fish does not have blood pumping through it. But if you look at a fish that is still alive and that the blood is still pumping through, the gills are very red. And the reason they are red is because they have a lot of blood flow. So large blood flow through the gills, giving them their red color. And that blood is carrying oxygen then that is utilized by the fish. Okay, so that, unfortunately, we can't see that when we dissect fish because their blood is not flowing at that point. But if you ever catch a fish and are going to throw it back, if you pull back the operculum a little bit and look at the gills, you'll notice that they have a pretty red color because of their very large blood supply. Okay, how about their nervous system? So they have a brain, fish have a brain, and they have a spinal cord. And most fish have a very good sense of smell. So we've already mentioned the olfactory lobes. They also have pretty large optic lobes. So this is vision. So this is smell. This is vision. In most animals, you can tell how well their senses are if you look at the size of different lobes in their brain. Interesting, the optic, even though they have pretty large optic lobes, they still don't see that great because light doesn't really penetrate the water very well. So even though they have they have a large optic lobe, they still don't have the greatest of eyesight. Also related to their nervous system, we saw this on a couple of pictures, and I'll go back and show you again. We have a lateral line, and this lateral line can pick up, it's a sensory organ, so it can pick up sensations. It can especially pick up vibrations and pressure. So one of the main things that it does is it allows them to avoid obstacles as they're swimming. If you look at a shark, sharks have a structure that is called the ampullae of Lorenzini. And we'll look at a picture here in just a minute. Lorenzini. Maybe you have heard that sharks are able to detect electricity. Well, this is the This is the organ that allows them to do that. So they can detect electrical fields, and that helps them to locate their prey, detect and locate prey. You may also know that sharks, you've probably heard that they can smell a drop of blood, from pretty far away. And that's because of that olfactory lobe that they have. So they can detect blood, and if they're detecting blood, that usually means that that's prey that has already been injured. So it would be prey that would be more easily caught by them. So they're going to go after that prey that's already been injured. Okay, so let's look at a couple of pictures here now. So here's this spiral intestine that I mentioned in a shark that gives them a bigger surface area for absorbing nutrients from the blood. And other than that, they have basically the same organs that humans have internally. Let's look at this picture. You can see the lateral line here. So here's the lateral line right here. So with that lateral line allows them to sense vibrations and pressure, so that they can avoid obstacles that they might run into. Guess we don't have a picture of the ampullae of Lorenzini, but that's the organ that allows sharks to detect allows them to be able to detect where prey is. Okay, let's talk. We're going to finish up with talking about some of the behaviors of fish. So you probably have heard that some fish school. So schooling is one behavior that we see in fish. Generally, the bony fish school, but the cartilage fish do not. Now, there is one example. So cartilage fish do not school. Now, one exception to that is the hammerhead shark, but in general, we would say that the cartilage fish do not school. And some of them will school for their entire lives. Some will only school when they're young. Others only school when they're feeding. So schooling serves different purposes. They can kind of surround prey. So that's a beneficial behavior for them. If you have a lot of fish kind of darting around, so if there's in a school and you have a lot of fish darting around in different directions, that can confuse predators. So even if the fish are small, if they're darting around all over the place, that can serve as a protective mechanism. So schooling is one behavior that fish will engage in. Another behavior that they engage in is migration. So we already mentioned the anadromous migration. So salmon, and we mentioned the lamprey. So salmon, they are hatched in fresh water. Then they go to the ocean for their adult lives. And then they go back to fresh water to reproduce. And perhaps you know that salmon will return to the exact location where they are hatched. So they're hatched in a particular location. They swim out to the ocean, and they will return to reproduce at the exact same location. And scientists aren't totally sure how they do that, but they think it's probably related to the sense of smell, so that when they move from the fresh water to the salt water, they leave a scent trail that then they follow back when it is time for them to reproduce. So salmon is one type of fish that is anadromous. Now there is another, besides anadromous, there are also fish that are catadromous. And catadromous, they do the exact opposite. So in catadromous, they live in fresh water. They go to the ocean to reproduce, or in salt water to reproduce. And then they come back as adults. And actually, when they go to the ocean to reproduce, they actually become larvae. And that larva kind of floats along as plankton. And then when they become adults, then they go back to fresh water. So they live in fresh water, reproduce in salt water, and then back to fresh water as adults. So catadromous is the opposite of anadromous. An example of a fish that does this is the freshwater eel. It is catadromous. Why do fish migrate? Again, scientists aren't completely sure about why they, but some do it for food. Some do it because it provides protection from predators. In some cases, maybe it's just safer for the young to be in those locations. Okay, so let's talk about reproduction, and then we will be done. Most fish are male or female. Some are hermaphrodites, which means that they are able to produce both eggs and sperm. The interesting thing about hermaphrodites is they don't usually reproduce with themselves. However, they can. So if there's a female fish and there's no male fish around, actually if there's a fish and there's no fish of the other sex around, the hermaphrodites will reproduce with themselves. So the reproduction is a driving behavior. So even though they don't normally reproduce them with themselves, they can if it's necessary. But most of them are male or female. Some fish can actually change their gender. So an anemone, there's a fish that's called an anemone fish. So this is not a sea anemone. It's actually a type of fish. And they are male when they're young. And then they will, they can transform to a female if there are no females around. So if there's just male fish and they need a female to reproduce, then one of the males, one or more of the males, can become females so that mating can happen. So we've said that some fish reproduce by external fertilization, where you just get eggs and sperm deposited into the water, and then if they are there at the same time and in the same location, then and the fish can also advertise that they are in that area with their color changes, then that increases the likelihood that reproduction will take place. And then we also mentioned internal fertilization, where the sperm are placed into the female. So like sharks reproduce in this way with internal fertilization. I think the rays do too. I think the sharks and rays all have internal fertilization. Yes, so sharks and rays do have internal fertilization. Okay, 3 more words that I'm going to throw out at you. Again, you study these in biology. So those words are oviparous, ovoviviparous, and then biviparous. Okay, so what's the difference? Okay, so most bony fish are this. So oviparous means that the eggs hatch outside of the body. Okay, so the female's eggs get fertilized and the eggs stay outside of her body and hatch. Eggs hatch outside of the body. So most bony fish are oviparous. Okay, then ovoviviparous mean that the eggs are hatched inside the female's body. So it's still an egg, and so the nutrition still comes from the yolk of the egg. And then once those eggs hatch, so both of these, nutrition comes from the egg. So nutrition from egg. So in the case of ovoviviparous, the egg is it's inside the female's body. It hatches inside the female's body. Then the young leave her body. So the type of fish that do this are the cartilage fish. And then lastly is viviparous. And viviparous is where the young receive nutrition from the mother. So no egg. There is an egg that's fertilized, but the egg doesn't have a yolk and doesn't provide the nutrition. The nutrition comes from the mother. So this is what happened. This is humans are, and all mammals are viviparous. Most mammals. I guess the platypus is an exception, but the young receive the nutrition from their mother. This is really rare. So viviparous is rare among the fishes. There are a few types of sharks and rays that are viviparous, but this generally is pretty rare among the fishes. Okay, so we don't see this. So a few sharks and rays are viviparous. Okay, but pretty rare among the fish. Okay, we're going to stop there. That finishes up Module 6, which is the first, our first discussion of marine vertebrates, and the next chapter will also be on marine vertebrates.